Welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, September 20th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Representative AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who looks like she might be running for president in 2028 or Senate in the state of New York. And it looks like, according to Axios, that those around her are leaving options open with this idea that AOC might want to seek a higher office than her current position as a United States member of Congress. Now, thinking about the 2028 election, there has been a lot of conversation around who's leading, who's not leading, and who might run. And what I will say is that 2028 is a far way away, but what's interesting for AOC is that there is two clear pathways forward should she decide to go for any of the higher offices that it seems that she is considering. And that's because in the 2028 election, there will be a lot of conversation in the lead up to with Senator Chuck Schumer, who right now represents the Democrats in the minority side in the United States Senate, that might actually face a real substantive primary challenge from AOC should she decide to run for Senate in 2028. On the flip side, when it comes down to the Democratic primary, AOC is a very high-profile name, probably as high name ID as a lot of other Democrats like Pete Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom, who across this country are very well known in Democratic households and in Democratic primary voting spaces, as I do believe AOC is as well. And so there will be that conversation that will be had amongst her team, amongst her, but what is interesting is that we are already starting to see this, really be fueled in terms of speculation, and what we know is that AOC is very young. She's obviously ambitious, and not in a way that I think is a critique. I think when you think about, the type of person who will run for president in 2028, I don't think that should she lose the primary, that her time in politics is anywhere over. In fact, I think there's a chance that if she decides to run for president, she could also just drop down and run for Senate if it is not viable. We saw, Marco Rubio was running for president in 2016, pivoted back to the Senate election right in time because he realized and read the writing on the wall that race wasn't going to go his way. And now he's in the administration as Secretary of State and is, high profile enough that he could run for president in 2028. So oftentimes, these initial bids are not the first time that people get elected into office. Joe Biden ran for office 3 times before being elected president. So, and that was a far, way removed, 1988, and then finally won in 2020. Very big differences here. But getting back to this point about AOC and this decision to run for president or Senate is ultimately very, very interesting to me. And I think that we can explore both sets of circumstances and what the results might look like in those cases. Now, to help orient ourselves, Chuck Schumer, who is right now the Senate Minority Leader for the Democratic Party, was first elected to the U.S. Senate back in 1988. He defeated an incumbent Republican, and it was a pretty notable victory. I mean, this is the era of Bill Clinton's impeachment, a lot of conversation around there, but Chuck Schumer was elected to the U.S. Senate. Then in 2004, won overwhelmingly, an exceptionally popular senator. Voters loved Chuck Schumer across New York. Even in 2010, a very strong year for the Republicans. They flipped 63 seats in the House, and yet New York still voted for Chuck Schumer, larger than the margin at which Obama won the state by just 2 years prior. Again, very much loved Chuck Schumer. Even with Donald Trump on the ballot in 2016, Wendy Long lost to Chuck Schumer. He got 71% of the vote. But since then, his view and approval, not even just amongst independents or Republicans, has changed, but also amongst Democrats too. Articles earlier on this year found that Chuck Schumer's favorability is at its lowest point in 20 years amongst New Yorkers, and that is very notable, right? To see that go from someone who is very much and was an electoral juggernaut in the state. If that was a swing state, he'd be winning the swing state by 15 to 20 points. Instead, he's winning a safe blue state that, Clinton won by 23. He's winning by 40, right? Massive, massive differences. More than 40, actually, when you look at the results. But again, Chuck Schumer's favorability rating has dropped tremendously, and we've already started to see it take an impact electorally. Then in 2022, he won his race with just 57% of the vote, underperforming Biden, underperforming Clinton, and underperforming every single one of his Senate bids, save the first one, when he defeated a Republican incumbent and was the first Democrat to hold this Senate seat since 1950. So you have to go way back, legions back. Bill Clinton was president, and the Monica Lewinsky scandal and impeachment was front and center to the American voter, and that was when Chuck Schumer had a narrow enough race that it contrasted well with this one. Now looking to 2028, there is every reason to believe that Chuck Schumer would face a competitive Democratic primary, especially if AOC decided to run. And we're already starting to see it. As Chuck Schumer's favorability rating is at its lowest point, AOC reached a high point in this same exact poll. Voters like AOC, and even in a race that has been floated a hypothetical of Schumer versus AOC, she edges him out in multiple polls. One from Data for Progress, another one from another Democratic group. These polls have found that in a head-to-head race, AOC leads Chuck Schumer 55-36. And the other data point here, she leads by a 21-point margin. This is against the senator who's been in this role since 1998. And so thinking about what that would mean for AOC, should she decide to run for Senate, my honest take here is that is a much easier pathway to a higher office than just going out and straight running for president. Because let's say she runs for president, misses the filing deadline for Senate in New York, does not end up deciding to go for it either, decides that she ran for president, she's not going to pivot and reduce down to the Senate race. I don't know. Obviously, don't know her thinking on this, but let's say, and explore that hypothetical, she gets into the administration, becomes secretary of whatever, is in the cabinet, assuming Democrats win. And again, it's a lot of big assumptions that might not even come to reality. That is the only thing I could really see as comparable. And then maybe she could go down the Pete Buttigieg route, run a department very well, go off and build out name ID just based off the way that you're being visible and engaging with voters and Americans. But it's no guarantee. And going from a cabinet position to president of the United States and running for that is a lot more difficult. And very much she might just like being in the U.S. Senate because she has done very well for herself in her congressional position. AOC, again, is a household name for anyone that watches politics, and she's one of 435 House members, and you really don't know that many. And thinking about the way in which her approval rating has risen, thinking about the way in which she is leading Chuck Schumer, the easy answer here is that if she wants an easier race to win for a higher office like Senate, she decides to go for it against Chuck Schumer. And the data says she'd probably win. Now, thinking about moving over to the presidential race, obviously this is a two-pronged question. Coming from New York doesn't really provide much of an electoral advantage on the national stage. But to get to the general, she has to get through the primary first. Now, I'm not, in opposition to the idea that someone like AOC could climb the ranks amongst the Democratic primary voting base. Look what Gavin Newsom did in just such a short period of time. He started out in January of this year, hovering around, third place. But even then, just in the mid-single digits, 5-6% on average. Now the most recent data from Atlas Intel tells us that Gavin Newsom has 37% support. YouGov said 23, Yahoo News said 21. We've seen it. Where Kamala Harris's numbers have gone down, Gavin Newsom's numbers have gone up. And as a result, everyone else has also gone down as well, and the undecided number has started to find itself dwindling. What did Gavin Newsom do to earn all of this press? Push back against Donald Trump and continue to speak to that Democratic voting base and speak to the primary, because to get to the general, you must win the primary. And thinking about this for AOC, she's already in a strong position. She's polling at fourth place nationwide as a representative, beating out the former VP nominee Tim Walz, Governor Josh Shapiro, Senator Cory Booker, Governor J.B. Pritzker. The list goes on and on. AOC's numbers are higher than a lot of people. And taking a look at it too, in some cases, she even beats out Pete Buttigieg in these races too. We found that sometimes her numbers are larger than his. And not to say that, that is the end all be all. But what has been quite interesting about this is Newsom, Harris, Buttigieg, and AOC are in that top four and have been consistently. And it doesn't look like much is going to change there. And so she could very well, again, as someone who's not campaigning on the national stage, not been able to build this out in the way that Gavin Newsom has, or Kamala Harris already had, or Pete Buttigieg already had. These are three people who, one is already running practically a shadow presidential campaign. The other two ran presidential campaigns at the same time. And then again in 2024, AOC has not done that, right? And she is a representative. It is very rare. In fact, we have not seen it happen in recent memory where a congressperson goes directly from being a U.S. rep to president of the United States. And it's not to say that it is impossible, but it goes to show that it is more impressive that her numbers are this high, given that her position lends itself to less than 1 million residents. And so thinking about, what we would see in 2028, again, a lot more people are going to want to run. But when I think about AOC's numbers too, it isn't just the names that have been listed here. You have to think too about the names that have already floated the idea that they might want to run, and how this is really, again, impressive that she's able to hold out this resounding advantage over a lot of candidates and a lot of top names that, the average person would say, I would prefer AOC over this person, even though, and not in every case. But in terms of what we've seen, she is polling higher than a lot of them. Polling higher than Andy Beshear, polling higher than Ro Khanna, Roy Cooper, right? Ruben Gallego, Mark Kelly, Amy Klobuchar, Chris Murphy, right? John Ossoff. I already mentioned Pritzker, I already mentioned Shapiro, Warnock. Big and top names that, say, I might be running in 2028. I don't know. I'm still exploring. AOC, who, again, this is the only real indication we've seen thus far that she wants to go for president and not for Senate. And even then, you're finding that it wasn't any of this framework or the ground game that she's done. She has not been campaigning on the national stage in the way Newsom has and others have in the past. And I think that is what is quite interesting about this. And so she doesn't start out as the favorite in the Democratic primary, don't get me wrong. In New York, she does. On the national stage, she does not. So there will be that question. There will be that conversation had amongst her advisors, her team, and herself and her family asking, do I decide to run for president? Do I decide to run for Senate? Because she's young. She's 35 years old, and that gives her 40 years to run, and she'd still be younger than Donald Trump when elected as president of the United States. So she has quite some time. So she could run for Senate in 2028, primary Chuck Schumer, make an even bigger shakeup than when she primaried Joe Crowley in 2018, and have a lot of notability to her name because of that. And that could springboard her into a much higher position in the future. But as it stands right now, there seems to be two pathways set forward for her. One seems a lot easier than the other. But high risk, high reward in running for president. It will be very interesting to see what her decision ultimately is. But it doesn't look like AOC wants to stay in the House of Representatives. And given her name ID and notability, you really can't blame her. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.